Today, as you know, we are continuing to celebrate Howard Community College's 50th anniversary. And I am really, really excited about this conversation because if there's anybody that you want to talk to about the college's history, is my two guests who are with me today. They are the historians, so they know all of the ins and the outs, and especially one of them, since he was part of the college since the beginning of it. So Rosemary Williams and Vladimir Marinich, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me this morning, for bringing history live. You know, we're gonna travel through time. On the caption for the show today, I wrote that history. I took a quote from Alexis de Tocqueville, and he said that history is a gallery of pictures in which there are a few originals and many copies. And I think that HEC and Columbia are some of those originals that come around once in time. So with that idea in mind, let's get to know you both a little bit better. Just tell us a little bit about yourselves. And Rosemary, if we can start with you, you know, tell us a little bit about where that passion for history comes from.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So I'm from England. I grew up in England, and I think living in England, everything is so accessible in terms of history. You everywhere you go, it's old buildings. You know, many people live in old, really old buildings, and we have castles and palaces, and even like Neolithic sites you can visit. So I think it makes history very vivid. You can sort of see what it was like at the time. I think that sort of sparks an interest in history. The first period of history that I really got engaged with was when I was in high school and college, and I started to become very interested in 20th century European history, period around the First and Second World War, the Russian Revolution. And I think why I like history so much is I love the research. I like to sort of dig deep into it, to follow clues and to find resources and to find that great source, which is going to give you a lot of information. So that's a process that I really enjoy.
You know, that is so cool. I've always enjoyed history. I've always enjoyed geography as well. Like I've always and I've come to really appreciate history. Like when I go to DC, and we went the other day to George Washington's house. His name escaping me right now. And I mean to walk there and to know that at some point he was there, and to know that all of these things happened in this place that I was standing at, it clicked. I honestly cannot say that I had that perspective before, but something different happened that day where, and then we went and just walked through the woods, and you know, by the river. And as you think through history, you're like, oh my gosh, this is where, you know, the boats were coming, and this is where all of that happened. And it just really gives you a much deeper appreciation of the land you're standing at, and a
Yeah.
lot more respect for your surroundings. Vlad, tell us a little bit about you. Where does that love for history come from?
Well, I was born into a Russian home. My parents and grandparents were basically refugees after the Russian Revolution of 1917, that then was followed by a civil war in Russia. So basically, you've got people who had to get out of town. Okay. My brother and I grew up, and we spoke Russian before we spoke English. But the history part of it has to do with the fact that both of my grandfathers, one I never knew because he was killed during World War I. The other one I knew slightly, but I got a chance to know about him much more. Both of them were generals in the Russian, well, one was in the Russian artillery and the other one was in the Russian security forces. My father was a cavalry officer in the Russian army during World War I. And we had lots of, photos hanging off our walls of my grandfather in his uniform, a painting of Peter the Great and Alexander II. So I grew up with Russian history always, and my parents and grandparents had friends who would come over and they would review Russian history. And it was always a very interesting kind of a conversation because they would reflect on how wonderful things were in Russia. Well, sure, because they were of the educated upper classes. Okay, and then of course they would review whose fault everything was, none of which was theirs. Okay, and then I kind of, I took courses and I thought it'd be nice to take a course in Russian history. So I took a course in Russian history, became more and more interested, and the rest is history.
That's such a powerful and impactful story, that you were living through history and you were listening to all of the stories. And I think that that's kind of where you are today with HCC, where you can tell the story, not because somebody told you, not because you read it anywhere, but because you were actually there from the beginning. And that to me is fascinating. I mean, the fact that we can sit here today with you, Vlad, and you can actually tell us, you were one of the first 10 full-time faculty that was hired back in 1970 here at HCC. If you could transport us back to that time and help us kind of like imagine what HCC looked like back then, from the campus, from its people, what could you tell us?
When most of us were hired, we were hired in the winter, early winter of 1970 and into the spring. And what did the college look like? Well, it didn't, okay? It was basically girders and some concrete that had been poured here and there, all in the middle of a farmland field. Most of the things that we did prior to the contract taking effect, because the contract was supposed to take effect in August of 1970, okay? But a lot of the things that we did on a voluntary basis, and God knows we were excited by it all, was to, interact with the person who was the dean of the faculty and with the person who was the librarian, because we, in effect, helped the librarian to establish the collections. So I had my specialty, and then Larry Medeiros, the historian, had his, so he would be recommending books and journals, et cetera, et cetera. I was doing my thing. Dan Friedman, his thing, Donna Kirkley, her thing, and on and on. So it was before the beginning, so to speak. But I do want to say one thing to all of my friends and colleagues at HCC. I wish them a one-day belated happy anniversary, because on Monday, October 12th, 1970, okay, exactly 50 years to the day and hour, the college opened its doors to students and we held our first classes. So it was very exciting, but one of the most exciting moments, okay, was the weekend before, Saturday, October 10th and Sunday, October 11th. We were all at the school because the Maryland State Department of Education allowed us to open late because the physical college was not quite ready. So we opened up about a month late, okay? But we were there on the Saturday and Sunday before October 12th, all of us, including from the president on down, faculty, administrative personnel, plant ops people, administrative staff, and each one of us had our assignment, okay? The president was sweeping the floors, okay? I was going from classroom to classroom, straightening out all the chairs or the desk tablets that were gonna be just right on Monday morning. I think Larry Madaris and Dan Friedman were walking around with Windex, and they were kind of making sure that the windows were clean. That was
That
wonderful.
was the beginning. That was the beginning. That's
That,
beautiful. So when we came, you know, if I had been one of those students who came to HEC back in that first day, I would have seen all of you working hard. The campus itself, was there parking? You know, was there like we have right now all the garages, and we have all of these other areas for parking. We have all of these buildings. We have all this nature. If I had come that day, that first day, what would I've seen?
you would have been able to park in a parking lot that existed kind of about maybe 100 yards inside of the what is the current entrance with our big concrete sign. Okay, and then you'd walk down a fairly lengthy sidewalk. Okay, until you reached the one and only two-story, almost square rectangular shape of concrete. Okay, and everything was in there. The administrative offices, the faculty offices, the classrooms, the one or two of the meeting rooms, and so on. And this building would be in the middle of a big, big open field. As a matter of fact, it was, I imagine something like maybe within the first year of the college opening that I met somebody at a party or something like that. And they asked me, so what do I do for a living? And I said, like, well, I'm on the faculty of Howard Community College. And they said, oh, where is that? And I described exactly where it was, off of Little Patuxent Parkway in the middle of a field, this rectangular building. And the person said, oh, I thought that was a BG&E relay plant.
That's how impressive that building was, that original building. Rosemary, you joined the college in 2009 as an adjunct faculty member. Tell us, what are some of the biggest differences, that you have been able to tell between the time that Vlad started and when you came on board?
Well, I think you almost wouldn't recognize the college, right, Vlad, from 1970 to today. I mean, it is just
True.
completely transformed. The physical, just the creation of the quad, I think that made a huge difference. That used to be a parking lot. You can see pictures of
Yes.
all the cars parked outside there. So, closing off that quad, it makes it feel like, a college campus. And even since I came, there's been so much growth. The health science building was completed. The SET, this huge gleaming glass structure, was completed. Academic Commons, we had our lovely new classrooms, all interactive. So there's been a lot of physical change. And of course, with physical change, you get the growth, so many more faculty, so many more administrators, so many more students. And talking to people who started when Vlad did, I think Vlad will probably agree with this. Early on, there was this very strong sense of community. I think you got it from what he was saying on everyone pitching in on the first day to get it cleaned up. Talking to people, there's a little bit of nostalgia for those early days because everyone knew everyone else. You're all in the same building. You all knew the students really well. And I think that's one of the challenges with growth. You just, as you grow, you get more students, you get more, we're separated now into our different buildings with our different divisions. So I think it is a challenge to keep that sense of community that was easy to maintain in the early days when it was just so much smaller.
Vlad, how have you seen that sense of community evolve throughout the years at Howard Community College? I know you're no longer part of HCC actively, but you were there for many years, and you got to see that growth. You got to see not just the new buildings, but the students going from 500 to now where we have thousands of students at HCC, and also 10 faculty to many, many, hundreds, if not thousands of faculty now here at HCC. So how do you see that HCC continues to try to really bring that community throughout the years and keep, as Rosemary was saying, because it is one of the challenges. The bigger you are, how do you get to know everybody by name? How do you know, how do you build that sense of community? What have you seen that maybe stays true throughout the time at HCC within that sense of community?
Well, in the early years, okay, and I don't know when the early years ended, okay, but in the early years, well, we had, I think, a little bit under 600 students that first year, okay. We all got a one-class teaching reduction so that we can work on curriculum development, and especially in something that is referred to as the systems approach, which tended to focus on having our classes develop the objectives that students had to meet. Okay, very, very rigorous, by the way. But anyhow, so we taught each one of us taught about 4 classes each. So if you've got 4 classes at about 25 each, and we did, you got to meet 100 students. But, okay, because we taught across disciplines in a number of cases, okay, our history professor, Larry Medeiros, taught American history, Western civilization, and political science, okay? Now, in the second year, we hired Dr. Jerry Casway. He taught Western civilization, political science, and geography, okay? So we taught across a lot of, a number of disciplines, okay? Which meant that the student that you had in one class, you might have in another one in the same semester, or if not, you would have that same student for another semester, or maybe even for the next year. We got to know our students really well, okay? I mean, I got to know a number of students, and I got to know about their brothers and sisters who may or may not have been at HCC. I got to meet and know parents. So it was very, very closely knit, okay? Now, because the faculty was small and it didn't explode exponentially, okay? The next year we hired 5 or 6 more, and then maybe 10 more, and so on. Okay, so that cohesive nature stayed. In addition to which, a number of our faculty were very, very interesting characters. Okay, and I don't mean I don't mean that in any pejorative way, but they were individuals who had very, very interesting personalities. Okay, several of us developed a TGIF meetings where we would meet at the Wild Lake Center, okay, and I think it was called DJ's Pub. There was an English pub in Wild Lake Village Center, and we would go there and we would just enjoy ourselves. A number of years later, I should say, the Social Sciences Division, of which I was a very, very proud member, and continue to be very, very proud of the Social Science Division, we developed a kazoo symphony orchestra. And we had about 10 or 12 of us, each of us having a kazoo, and we would perform concerts. I was the conductor, okay, probably because I was a bigger ham than my colleague Jerry Casway, okay, but he was first kazooist. Okay, so and you know, and we would rehearse, okay, and we were invited by various different areas of the college to perform. So if it was somebody's birthday in the business office, they would invite us to come over to the business office and do happy birthday to you on the kazoo, and then maybe play one or two of our specialties. So that kind of cohesion lasted for a very, very long time. Since this coming December, I will have been retired for 8 years. While I maintain contact with some of my friends and colleagues, and I maintain contact with my dear colleague, Rosemary. Okay, but you know, you kind of lose something about knowing what's going on.
Rosemary, what has your experience been? You know, I mean, Vlad is even talking about having this group that goes and sings to other employees. You know, how do you think that HEC has tried to really keep that community, you know, within, yes, faculty, staff, but also with our students?
Yes, you can tell what I mean about, I think they used to have more fun in the old days, right? When it was smaller. But yes, it is a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that we are meeting. We have things called FPLCs, which are faculty professional learning communities, where we'll get together from different divisions and choose a topic that's of interest to everyone. And it's a whole year, you last a whole year. So you meet regularly with people from different backgrounds, different divisions, and you really do get to know each other in that way. So, and there are learning communities for the students as well. We have the honors community, different honors communities, different learning communities, like the craft collegians is an example. So there are efforts to make the college seem a little bit smaller, a little bit more of a sense of community for both the students and the faculty. You do have to work a little bit harder on it as we grow, but I think we do achieve that. I think we still have that sense of community at HCC.
Stronger, like there was such a, I don't know, such an influx of communication and this real push to get us all together to make sure that we all knew that we were there for our students and for each other. That I felt more connected now than probably when I was in the building to many of the people at HEC. Vlad, you were there with our first president, the first HEC's president, Alfred J. Smith. And the vision that he provided was always to have the best practices in student learning. What did that mean in those early years of HEC? What did they look like, those best practices back then?
Well, the first thing was that we got incredibly rigorous training in how to establish objectives. Okay, now you know that we were not there to be professors. That is, to stand up in front of a group and profess our knowledge. We were there to be, and I'll use a term that Dr. Smith, our first president, used. We were there to be managers of learning. Okay, the whole point was that we're there for students, and what we want to be able to do is to clearly demonstrate what it is that the student should know or be able to accomplish, or if it's where the student needs to know, okay, how do we determine how that knowledge can be demonstrated? So we needed to go through an entire process of figuring out some of the detail of, if we want the student to be able to differentiate between two things, how do we have to present that information so that the student will be able to do that? If the student is supposed to be able to analyze something, okay, what are the steps that have to be taken by the student that we would help the student to get to the end point where they could demonstrate that. One of my colleagues of back then said that going through this program, which really, really was rigorous in the first 2 years, but then it continued because we had to keep updated, all right? But my colleague said that what we went through was the equivalent of a PhD dissertation and defense. And we thought like, yeah.
And proudly so, right?
Yeah, and based upon, you know, even when President Smith retired in '81, if I remember correctly, and a new president came in, Dwight Burrell, okay, the faculty were already on a roll of just doing this as part of their job. And it stayed. And my understanding is now with all of the new technology at HCC that that approach is still in effect and enhanced by, I think that, you know, we've got incredible classrooms now that enhance that kind of approach.
Rosemary, can you help us kind of bring it to where it is today, you know, compared to back then where they didn't have the technology, but my gosh, I mean, it sounds like the education, the quality of the education was the critical thinking. The one thing that, as you were describing it, Vlad, what kept coming to me was that critical thinking that is so important, you know, yesterday, today, and I'm sure that it's going to continue to be just imperative that we all have in the future. How does HCC continue to stay true to that, but also implement, you know, the changes of society, of community, of technology, everything that continues to just evolve around us, Rosemary?
Yes, well, one thing that really struck me when I came here to teach is that the faculty, you know, they're not done. They're not like, okay, I know how to teach this. The faculty is always learning. It's always a process, and there's a very strong emphasis on professional development. There's a lot of professional development available to you, and you're encouraged to participate in that. In terms of, you know, we have instructional designers there to really help you constantly update, use the new best practices, use the new technology to update your teaching. So it's not like you're ever kind of done, like, okay, you know, I'll just teach that the same forever. We're always encouraged to use not just new technologies, but new best practices. Just a little example from social science. You're going to get some social science promotion here because Vlad and I are from the same division. Last year, we created our own little learning community where we had a reading circle. We would meet regularly, the whole division. We were reading a book on best practices in teaching, and we'd meet, we'd collaborate, we'd share ideas amongst our colleagues. And it was really helpful. It was really great. You really have a sense that we're all working on this together and we're all improving together. So I think that's one of the sort of philosophies of HCC is, you know, you're not done. You need to keep working on it and adapting and changing.
And that absolutely trickles into the students, because that's as an HCC alumni myself, that was one of my favorite things, is that my teachers were actively, I mean, sometimes they even offer us job opportunities, or they could bring us to their jobs so that we can just observe what they were doing. So it just really gave us this sense that, you know, this is a professional who is in the field, who is working, but wants to really instill that in us, and it's just giving us first-hand information that we wouldn't access otherwise. Let's talk about affordability. Go ahead, Vlad, go ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback onto what Rosemary said, and I'd like to use one of our colleagues as my example. Rosemary, I'm sorry, I'm going out of the history realm and into economics. Okay, okay. The college has Professor John Bauman, who is professor of economics at Howard Community College, okay? And he has done two remarkable things in his career. One is he developed his economics 101 and 102 macro and microeconomics courses, okay, to where he put more and more learning information, texts, assignments, and everything into, I guess, the internet, okay, into a computer system, so that students would not have to buy these horribly expensive textbooks. Okay, so that's number one. Okay, and it took him a number of years to do that. Okay, however, now with the pandemic upon us, okay, he is teaching a course from home, Zooming. Okay, and he has organized his at-home thing as a classroom. So he's got I'll call it a chalkboard, a whiteboard behind him, and somehow or other he has two cameras working so that the student can see him not as a talking head like I'm coming across, okay, but as somebody in a room, and he walks back and forth. And so the communication via Zoom is as close to reality of a classroom as you can get, okay? And by the way, I sometimes bump into his students. Oh my goodness. They praise him up one side and down the other, not only as the great guy that he is, but as an incredibly effective instructor.
And that speaks volumes, you know. And you did mention, I was going to go into affordability, and you mentioned that because that has been something that HEC has recognized since 1978 when they created the Educational Foundation. And you know, when you read the books and you look at history and you look at the price of tuition back then and you compare it to today, you're like, I mean, it sounds like it was so cheap, right? When you compare the prices to back there. Do you remember, Vlad, tuition, how much tuition was back then in the
Oh my
70s?
God. I'm going to take a guess, but I don't think I'm going to be way off. I think it was something like $15 a credit. Okay,
Yeah,
maybe not quite even that.
I read somewhere that you needed like $178 or something like that to complete your, I think, your year at HEC. So, but you know, affordability is something, and you mentioned that story of this professor who, to make affordable the textbooks, he decided to just put them online so that students wouldn't have to pay for that. What have you seen, you know, what have you seen throughout the years as affordability continues to be an issue in education that HEC has done to really try to help and facilitate and make sure that everybody can come and study and afford their education at Howard Community College?
Well, I guess, you know, in my rambling here before you, uh, probably a couple of things. One of them is, of course, you know, our program of scholarships, okay, and endowed scholarships also. So it's not that, you know, we can give you a couple of $100 this year and then that's about it, okay? But we also have a fairly sizable number of endowments so that the money is there and we'll give you a scholarship, but the money for the scholarships comes out of the interest, not out of the capital that exists, okay? And I think that that office that is being managed by Missy Maddie, I think has been very, very successful over the years, and the staff there have been very successful over the years. But there's another part of it, and that is, it's not so much that the cost of coming to a community college is still lower than if you went even to, you know, let's say Maryland or Towson or something like that, but it's the possibilities and the probabilities that you can come to HCC, okay, for very, very reasonable money, and then you can go on and it could be a good experience, okay? The last I heard, okay, was that Washington College on the other side of the bay, okay, has a good amount of money to offer to HCC students, especially if they come through one of our honors programs and also have been in the honor society, Phi Theta Kappa, okay? There are a number of initiatives that had been created by our colleague who retired several years ago, Barbara Greenfeld, who was in charge of admissions, and she was able to work out articulations and understandings between Howard Community College and places like Hopkins, I believe Brown University, several universities in Pennsylvania, where if you get your AA degree and you were in one of the honors programs, you are admitted, all right? And that's incredible incentive. If you do well at HCC, you can go to one of the universities and continue your career, which I think, okay, has proven that HCC is one of the best community colleges in terms of producing quality students, okay? And in my estimation, HCC is the best community college in Maryland.
Well, you called it already, Vlad. And, you know, I am an alumni, and I'm very proud of the education that I received at HCC. And, you know, going back to the idea of the educational foundation, the one thing that I really enjoy about it is, as you said, you know, all of those articulations and all of those things that are happening in the academic level with other reputable or institutions around the country, but also the fact that it really brings that idea of community, because this is a way for community to participate. This is a way for everybody who's here in Howard County and beyond to really take advantage of all the events, the fundraisers, the things that they organize, and know that they can really make a difference and an impact on our students. And it empowers our students to know that if you want to pursue your education, but maybe funding is a problem, there is somebody that you can come and talk to at Howard Community College, because like Vlad has been saying, we really want to help you, and like HCC says, get there from here. So just keep that in mind, as if you're somebody who wants to pursue your education and is having, you know, barriers, as we all sometimes find in life, there is a door. So come and knock on our doors, talk to us. There is a way. There is a way for you if you want to pursue your education. Let's move a little bit into this idea. When Jim Rouse created Columbia, you know, he said that among other things, Columbia would be a polycultural, multi-faith, and interracial town, right? That's why I said that Columbia in itself is one of those originals through time, because it was something unheard of at the time that Columbia was coming to be. How did HCC honor that vision, Vlad, when it first came to be? You know, I were you part of those conversations? Maybe did you guys have meetings where you talked about how do we make sure that this vision that Columbia has is really applied into the education and into everything that we offer here at Howard Community College?
Well, initially, I think that our big push in terms of making it culturally more diverse than perhaps than it started out, okay, was that we developed an office where we hired an individual who would be responsible for Veterans Affairs, okay, and back then, okay, that was pretty critical, okay? Because you figure in, you know, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, okay, we had a lot of Vietnam vets who were coming back to school, and they didn't always know, how things worked and so on and so forth, and how um, the funding could work for them to help them out. And so we hired a fella uh, who was going to work with veterans coming back to school. Okay. Another thing that was something that we worked on, okay, was that we established the school year and the schedule so that um, things like the spring break would occur at HCC at the same time that it occurred within the Department of Education of Howard County, because we were getting a lot of moms coming back to school. And, if we had our break in the very, very middle of the September, but Easter and Passover came 2 or 3 weeks later, well then I guess, gee whiz, Mom, you're gonna have to find someplace, to put your kids, or you're gonna have to be absent. Now that's, that's not quite the multicultural thing that we talk about now. Okay, but certainly just in terms of the way that we began to offer courses drew more people. Okay, we used to offer Western civilization and American history. Okay, and that was it. Okay, we started teaching more than just Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, Middle Ages, Renaissance, World War I, World War II. Okay, we actually started mentioning that, yeah, things were happening in China and India way back when, and the Arabs did have some contributions to things. And of course, the classical examples that were used were to algebra and the concept of zero and so on and so forth. And we started understanding that, we being the descendants of European exceptionalism required a little bit greater breadth. Now, my understanding, and Rosemary, you're going to have to, handle this, that there's a heck of a lot more attention to that nowadays.
Right. Yeah. I think we really do a great job at HCC in really supporting our diverse students. We have, just the recent example when international students' visas were threatened by some changes in the law, which luckily didn't take place. But the college really rallied round to support these students to ensure that they could keep learning at HCC. We have the safe zones, which give a supporting community to our LGBTQ students. We have gender-neutral bathrooms. We have a food bank, to support the students who are in need of extra economic help. We have a lot going on in the college. We have a very strong diversity program. So I think we do have a lot going on to really continue Rouse's vision of really supporting diversity at HCC.
Absolutely. And, one thing that I've heard from both of you just now is that understanding diversity and what that means for the time in which we are right now. Like when the college started, I mean, you just mentioned the moms who were coming back to school, you mentioned veterans, I mean, that is diversity. I think that many times we think of diversity as just color. And absolutely, that is one of the things, and that's something that you see at the college, and the college absolutely enhances. And like Rosemary was saying, there's a lot of things happening when it comes to that side of diversity, but it's also understanding the economical diversity. It's also understanding the background diversity. It's also understanding the sexuality diversity. I mean, all of these other parts of diversity that make the school strong and that HCC recognizes. And like both of you said, it, you know, recognizes that is there, that there is a need for help in those areas, and it has no fear of going and saying, how can we support these students, meet them where they are, and help them so that they can achieve their goals. The other thing that's important for the campus, and that was important for Jim Rouse, was to preserve nature. And I mean, you just have to go to HCC really, and the nature around the campus is beautiful. That was one of the things that I missed so much this year when we had to close our doors, because there's this beautiful tree right behind McEwen Hall that I purposely walk by no matter where I park, just so that I can see the flowers bloom. And, you know, I missed it this year, because we didn't come back after COVID-19 in March, right? What are some of the things through time, Rosemary, that you know that the college has done and continues to do to preserve that nature and honor that idea of Jim Rouse?
Yes, like you say, that we have a beautiful campus, we have a lake, we have a little wooded area, we have rain gardens. Recently, I think there's been a lot of emphasis on stream restoration, on habitat restoration, on native plantings. If you look at some of our lovely new areas that are planted, they're all planted with native plantings. And of course, when you look at sustainability at HCC, you've got to look at our own Bob Marietta, better known as Sustainability Bob, right? Who has been running a lot of these programs and really promoting this from the beginning, and hosting, I think we host Greenfest at HCC. We have a sustainability day. He's really promoting recycling. And when you look at the new buildings also, they were designed, the Health Science Building and the SET Building were designed to meet these standards of energy efficiency. They are certified, I think they have a gold certification for their energy efficiency. So you see this going on all around campus, not just in the natural environment, but also with the buildings that have been built most recently.
Can
It
I
shows
add,
the, yeah, absolutely.
if I could just add, you know, you have to let the old dinosaur come out and, you know, mention stuff out of more ancient history. Before Duncan Hall was constructed, we had a wooded area there, and extending down a little bit of a hill and then up again, and then we have the other parking lot there, okay? But there was a lot of wooded area there. And one of our faculty, Professor Sue Bard, the late loved Sue Bard, worked on developing a nature trail. And the nature trail would have certain stops where, you know, you could, you know, look at whatever it was, whether it was an interesting species of bush or a tree or whatever, okay? And she developed an audio tutorial that you could listen to as you walked through this nature trail. And the school would offer tours that would be run by Sue. And I think that there were one or two students that helped her out. And also there was a biology professor that I think also helped out, Roland Chapdelaine. Okay, he went on to other things in his life. Okay, and we had that for several years, and that helped us to enlighten kids from schools who would come. Okay, but also in doing that, okay, we were also developing a reputation of being some pretty serious, responsible people who wanted to do things that were environmentally friendly for the total community. Excuse my interruption.
Oh, no, absolutely. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that you brought that, because it really shows that from the beginning, HCC was thinking about how to be nature friendly, how to preserve nature, but grow at the same time. And, you know, it's just a combination of, okay, we need more buildings, we need to keep growing. Education is a need in our community, but we need to also be mindful of our planet, because, well, we only have one, and we want to make sure that we take good care of it as we continue to develop. we have about 8 to 10 more minutes here. There's a couple questions and that I want to ask you both. One on the personal side, and Vlad, let's start with you. Through the years, as you go back, what's the one thing, one memory that either you cherish the most, or that transformed you the most, or impacted you the most through your time at HCC?
Well, it's probably, if it's only one thing, it's one kind of big thing that has tentacles all over the place, okay? Certainly, the event of getting ready for the opening was something that I will remember, and that I also jealously cherish, okay? Because there are not 10 of us left, okay? There are fewer, okay? But like, we were the trailblazers, okay? I take great pride in that, okay? But the other part of it is that, God, I love the classroom, okay? And I refer to it as, I love being there, mixing it up with the students, okay? And I love my colleagues, right? Great people, okay? And aside from the fact that, I had the privilege of being associated with individuals who were scholars, who were authors, who were sensational teachers, okay? And by the way, I have proof that my colleague Rosemary is there, okay? I have met students who were in Rosemary's class, okay? And she is praised up one side and down the other, okay? But, and my final statement will be this, that having spent more than half of my life at HCC, okay, for the reasons that I've given, and also I taught what I love to teach, okay, was just an incredible blessing, okay, and okay, final words. When I would get up in the morning, okay, and I'd have my breakfast, clean up, get dressed, I would tell my wife, I'm going to school. I never said I'm going to work. And that is still deep inside of me in terms of how blessed I was to have spent my life in that environment.
That you keep learning, that you're teaching, you're learning. It's just a beautiful metaphor right there. And that's how we should have our lives be, where we don't go to work, we go to do the things that we love to do. Rosemary, how about you? What's, if there's one thing that really stands out for you, what is that?
Yeah, I really echo what Vlad was saying. It's very hard to choose one thing. Really I think the interaction with the students is really what keeps it fresh, keeps it interesting. Every semester you might be teaching the same courses, but boy, you get a different group of students in your classroom, and you always learn a lot from your students. They always have different things to tell you, different things you can learn. One group of students I really have enjoyed interacting with is the mature students we get at HCC. These may be like retired from their main jobs, and they just want to keep learning. And they've come to history class because they love history. And I always enjoy this group a lot. I love interacting with that group, and I always feel like I learn so much from that group. So really interacting with students, learning from your students is what really keeps everything fresh and interesting, and it really has the most impact, I feel. Also learning from your colleagues, of course, collaborating and working with each other. So this goes back to the sense of community, I guess.
You know, I'm glad that Rosemary, when she said that she especially enjoyed, interacting with mature students, some of whom were retired, okay? I'm glad she did not use the word old in my presence. I would have been really ticked off.
To close our conversation with just quick questions that I hope that you guys can answer maybe with one word up to one sentence maximum. It's just, little things. So let's start with your favorite place on campus. Vlad, what's your favorite place on campus?
The classroom.
And for you, Rosemary?
Yeah, my lovely new office and classroom in Academic Commons, all newly renovated, which I really want to get back to.
Now, your favorite menu item from the Cafe on the Quad?
I'm going to have to go a little bit off the cafe and go to Starbucks and get one of their coffees. And a pastry, maybe add a pastry.
How about you, Vlad?
It was the chicken pizza with ranch dressing as my entree. And then a mocha cappuccino and an almond croissant.
Yes. Now you're talking.
Starbucks is definitely a hit, Everybody that I've talked to goes back to Starbucks. They're like, the first thing they say is Starbucks, and then they think about the rest of the menu. So coffee is a favorite for sure. What's your favorite HCC event?
I always like the first big meeting of the semester when we all get together in Smith and it's like, hi, welcome back, and you have that energy at the start of the semester. Not that we run out of energy by the end, but it's always a fun kind of start to the year. You meet everybody ahead, and you just get that excitement going into the semester.
The first week of the semester.
The first week of the semester. That's always very special, very magical. I agree. If you had to choose one song that could represent HCC, which one would it be?
One song?
Mm-hmm. If there was a song that you think that you listen to and you think this talks about HCC, maybe the community or maybe the power, or what would it be?
You probably never heard of it, and it's not even in English, okay? But it's the international student song, Gaudeamus Igitur.
I'll have to look that up and make sure to listen to that.
I need to look that up too. I want to hear that one. I don't think I have a song, but the songs from Hamilton keep going around in my head whenever I'm teaching. I teach American history, and I'm always like, don't start singing. Just stop.
And then if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to our first college president, Dr. Smith, what would you tell him?
Well done.
Yeah, I don't think he needs to change anything. I think he really did a good job in setting us on a great course.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you guys would like to add before we wrap our conversation up? It's been wonderful for me to travel down history lane with both of you and to see, how things have changed, but also how much of it still remains the same, like the core values of the HCC continue to just flourish in the conversation, no matter if we're talking about when it first opened or where we are today at home, through COVID. And it's just been beautiful to listen to that. But is there anything else you guys would like to add before we wrap our conversation up?
Just to say thank you very much for interviewing us. And I think all of us as students and faculty, really looking forward to getting back together when it's safe to do so. We're looking forward to seeing each other in person, not just on Zoom again.
I miss the place, okay, every day. Although I recognize that it had been my time to make room for others, okay? And thank you for, letting us share these moments with you. And to let me see my friend and colleague, Rosemary, okay, who, we've been emailing or talking on the phone, but never never face to face, even though it's virtual face to face.
Virtual face to face.
It's good to see you, and it was really, really wonderful to meet you, Chris.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful to meet both of you, to talk to both of you, and to really take a look at how HEC started, where it is today, how it has evolved, but at the same time, as I said earlier, how it continues to be a wonderful place where we really take into consideration where the students are, what their needs are, and how to best meet them and teach them those critical thinking, those best practices that from the beginning have been part of the college.